Hello, everybody. Thanks for your patience. You are here to attend the Go All In with Apple in the Classroom webinar. Thanks for joining us. I'm Michael Devins. I'm a product manager here at Jamf, focusing on our Apple integrations, and I'm joined by Sam Weiss. Sam, you want to tell the team or the folks what you do?
Hi, everyone. My name's Sam. I'm part of a really cool team here at Jamf that really focuses on helping schools and organizations get excited about the possibilities of technology. So excited to join you today.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. So we're talking about going all in with Apple in the classroom. And of course, we'll discuss the tools, but more importantly, we want to discuss some of the challenges that these tools can help you overcome in the classroom, in your schools, and your districts. Because at the end of the day, we really believe that it's about the effectiveness of your teachers and the learning that your students are going through. And all of this is about how IT can facilitate both of those goals. So before we jump into Jamf Pro, which is sort of the primary solution we'll talk about today, I do want to make a brief mention about Jamf Now. With Jamf Now, you can go from 0 to zero touch in minutes. Jamf Now is a really lightweight management solution that makes it incredibly easy to get started with deployment programs, specifically the device enrollment program and the volume purchase program for app assignment, device-based app assignment to your devices. Of course, in education, the learning is all about the applications, and being able to get those learning apps onto the devices of the students and teachers is critical. Jamf Now recently added support for teammates, allowing for multiple administrators, so you no longer are limited to just a single administrator with Jamf Now. And with recent enhancements to Apple's Classroom app, you no longer require the complex Apple School Manager integration and infrastructure in order to use that Classroom app in the classroom with your students. And we'll touch more on that a little bit later. I mention this because we continue to see more and more schools piloting iPad programs, bringing Apple into the classroom, and these small programs still greatly benefit from being able to deploy Apple in the classroom with access to these deployment programs and with access to Classroom app. And we're excited to be able to support deployments of all sizes in finding success even before they're ready to take it to the next level. Of course, the primary solution that most schools are using in the classroom, in the school, is Jamf Pro. And this is the tried and true solution from Jamf over the last 15 years. Jamf Pro allows schools to scale Apple in the classroom. There are a number of aspects to this within Jamf Pro, but of course life cycle management is chief among them. It's not just that a device lives for 3 or 5 years or longer, but the fact that every year, every semester, that life cycle resets. And with zero-touch deployments, you can handle more with less. Again, there's a huge emphasis on the value of apps and books distribution, and we'll talk about this, really how it facilitates those actual human interactions, those learning experiences. This is really where Apple in the classroom thrives. And it really addresses that question of why Apple. It's that differentiating experience with what you can do on these devices. Of course, self-service is a powerful solution that allows staff and students to access the content they need. And with Jamf Pro 10, we have a brand new self-service experience on the Mac, making that an even richer native experience. Of course, lastly, I'll mention Day Zero support. Apple continues to move their platform, their ecosystem forward, and they do it every year on a pretty regular cadence. And so that means that you and the school need to keep up and up to date with what they're doing with iOS and macOS and deployment programs. And for you to be successful, you're able to use a tool like Jamf. Now, it used to be the case that Day Zero came once a year. It was in the fall. Of course, that's expanded to the spring and the fall. Most recently this fall, we released support for both the macOS, iOS, and tvOS releases. And over time, they continue to add functionality as well as expanding their deployment programs. And of course, Apple doesn't wait for anybody. They continue to push forward. When these updates hit the wire, it's go time. And that's why we pride ourselves and find it so critical to support you the moment those releases become available so you can be successful in your schools. This can be a stressful time for us, for you, for all of the parties involved, but it's also really exciting because of all of the new functionality Apple continues to add, especially on the iOS side and the expansion of their classroom learning experiences. Most schools start their year with this new feature release supporting Apple's fall operating systems, which makes Jamf foundational to the success in your school with your deployments. And we work really hard so you can embrace that latest technology, because it's not just about give me the new stuff. That's of course important. There's always new things unlocked. But maintaining compatibility, ensuring that a new operating system isn't going to throw one of your existing workflows off the rails is really important. So it's not just new features. It's not just compatibility. It's both. And then when you think about it, your Jamf Pro instance is never standing still, but there are a lot of other moving pieces as well. The world sort of revolves around you. Devices are always coming and going. Apps and books are being deployed daily. You've got staff and students in the mix, humans, and of course the rosters that are constantly changing. And this really creates some audacious challenges that you have to handle in your schools. Now, the good news is that about 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago now, Apple stepped up in a big way when they created Apple School Manager. Apple School Manager, of course, is a tool that allows IT administrators to more easily manage people and devices and content in a central web-based portal. Now, I want to touch on a handful of specific challenges that IT administrators, teachers, faculty, staff are facing as they adopt Apple ecosystem in the classroom and support these workflows. So we'll start at the top with consolidated ownership. At the highest level, admins are using Jamf Pro to support the devices and the apps and books in your environment. With these two considerations in mind, let's start with devices. So with the launch of Apple School Manager, education customers now have access to the device enrollment program features directly within Apple School Manager, where previously you would go to deploy.apple.com. That's now all home inside of Apple School Manager. It's the same device enrollment program you know and love. Your existing servers continue to work, and creating new ones is just as easy. It's a single place to manage your devices, and we know how valuable this is when it comes to managing this life cycle of devices, especially in education. It really unlocks everything from that zero-touch enrollment to managing of software updates. Now, of course, it's the case, and it's been the case, that while the device enrollment program is a really elegant solution to overcoming some of these challenges, many schools have at least some number of devices that are not a part of the device enrollment program. Perhaps because they were purchased secondhand or donated, or perhaps because the purchase method, the reseller, did not support it at the time. And that really kind of created a gap in the way that you support these devices over time. Some being in DEP, some being outside of DEP. So I'm sure many of you were excited, and if you don't know about it, you'll be excited shortly, to learn about the new functionality that was added to Apple Configurator this fall. Using Configurator to add devices is a great new capability, really significant for education customers. With Configurator 2.5 or later, you're able to add devices to your existing device enrollment program regardless of how they were purchased. This is way better than submitting paperwork and purchase orders. This puts you in control of that process. And the basic premise is that possession is 9/10 of the law. So you're able to use this on iOS 11 and tvOS 11 devices. There's a 30-day provisional period. I'll talk through that in a moment. But what it does is it gives you full access to the device enrollment program management capabilities regardless of how you're using or regardless of how you've purchased these devices. It's important to understand the immense focus that's placed on user privacy. So I'll just point this out. This is a lock screen, and specifically, we can see this footer message that this device is managed remotely, and you can leave remote management in settings. And I'll just point out what that looks like. This is the settings pane, and you're probably thinking, well, the device enrollment program is supposed to give me mandatory enrollment. In other words, users cannot leave, cannot become unmanaged, and yet I see a leave remote management button right here. It's important to understand that this is that provisional period, that 30-day window where the device that was manually added to DEP can be removed from the device enrollment program. In fact, if you wipe a device during this 30-day provisional period, that same footer message is there, the option to leave the remote management capability, leave the device enrollment program. And so just to speak a bit about what happens when you add a device, It's actually putting this device into a new MDM server inside of the device enrollment program. And so if this device gets wiped, it actually can re-enroll, or you can move it to the proper MDM server that's linked with Jamf Pro. But then after 30 days, this device is fully first-class citizen DEP enrolled. So it's a really nice option for getting all your devices consistently into the device enrollment program. And I'll just point out something specific here. So we think about a 30-day provisional period with the option for students to leave management, to become unmanaged, which would wipe the device and it would not re-enroll automatically. Many schools have adopted a strategy of completing this process more than 30 days prior to students getting hands on these devices, so you can be ensured that this device is fully in DEP. Of course, you can always disown devices. When you disown or when you leave remote management during that 30-day window, the device will wipe, or after you disown it, it will not automatically re-enroll. Of course, you can always add it back in again with a new 30-day provisional period. Now, we talked about devices and consolidated ownership, getting everything into DEP and having access to that, but we also need to talk about apps and books, because beyond the devices, the content you deploy to your staff and students is really the rich learning experience and what facilitates that. So let's talk about apps and books. Nearly all of our education customers, all of our schools, are using the volume purchase program to easily deploy apps and books to staff and students in your schools. And of course, this visual I have here implies a level of simplicity that doesn't always meet reality. And what I mean by that is the reality is that many schools and many districts actually have a multitude of volume purchase program accounts, multiple tokens. This might be because you have different budgets or different buildings. At the end of the day, it's a lot to keep track of and manage, and they're all disconnected. They're all separate accounts. This is the world of IT administrators today. And it has some challenges. Content ownership can be tough. It can be difficult to manage, and there's some risk associated with it. For instance, if someone leaves your district or you lose access to one of those accounts, the content within that account goes away as well. Now, the good news is that Apple has solved for this challenge by bringing the volume purchase program experience that you know inside of Apple School Manager to address a number of these capabilities. Apps and books within Apple School Manager means that now all of your content is owned by the institution, no matter who does the purchasing. Prior to migrating to Apple School Manager, if you've done this already, if you've adopted Apple School Manager, you likely went through a process of associating your various VPP accounts together. This here is the reason for that association. If you didn't do that step with Apple Care before migrating, there is an option to invite additional VPP accounts within Apple School Manager if you didn't go through that manual association. But what happens then within Apple School Manager is each of these, what you knew as a VPP account, get assigned to their own location. These existing tokens will continue to function through the migrations. You don't need to worry about interrupting your end users. And I made a point as well. I just want to call back attention to this, that the locations we see in the top left, I can have multiple locations analogous to sites in Jamf Pro, and you want to make sure to migrate one VPP token to one location only. We don't want to combine multiple tokens to one location, or else you can risk stranding some content. But what this allows you to do once you're in here is really powerful with the flexibility that you have with the centralized management of this content. You're able to actually do a number of new things now that they're centrally managed that you couldn't do before. So you can consolidate all of your content from multiple VPP tokens, or what are now multiple locations, into a single location, which essentially means one VPP token in Jamf Pro. The tokens are still interacting within the same fashion. You can reorganize your content. You can move things around. You can move them between locations. You can offload extra licenses. It's the case that you might have purchased 20,000 copies of the free app of the week a bunch of times, and now you've got a really heavy token with a lot of content. You can offload content you're not using, which can actually speed up the performance as Jamf Pro interacts with Apple's volume purchase program with the apps and books service. And of course, if apps are removed, you can actually offload those, put them into a stale location or a token for apps that you don't interact with any longer, so that they're not slowing down or causing issues with your sync. So some really powerful capabilities with being able to move these, including performance enhancements. So, as I said, within Apple School Manager, administrators now have a single place to go for managing the device enrollment program devices, and also greater ability to get devices into DEP using Apple Configurator. And with the new capabilities around apps and books, you're able to manage all of that content in one place, really bringing all of that into an institutionally owned realm, and then you can control the management of that content between locations. Which gets nicely into the next point here, which relates to the delegation of the control, because now that it's all together, we want to address how we previously might have handled this with different accounts now that they're all centrally managed, because you're talking about a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And the good news is that Apple School Manager provides some really nice granular controls here as well. So let's talk about the delegated access capabilities. First, I'll just point out that, of course, there are capabilities of doing delegated access within Jamf Pro, and we've got some resources on jamf.com about ways that teachers can become more involved with the management of Jamf Pro and some simple delegated access workflows. But specifically here, I want to call out all the new capabilities around the roles within Apple School Manager and the permissions tied to them. You can actually customize privileges for these roles to fit your school's workflow. For instance, you can give every teacher the ability to view apps and books while limiting purchasing to a smaller subset of content managers. This allows more people to be involved in the process without excessive risk or complexity, and all while using the same Apple ID that they're already using. The same concept applies to device managers. So while there are schools that are really trying to involve more teachers and ed techs, we finally have a framework, a set of roles and privileges that allow IT to get more people involved, allow that delegation to go more mainstream, because it's so important to scale these experiences that we have the right people involved at the right time. So when it comes to managing access for all of the different staff members involved in your management workflows, Apple School Manager makes delegated access really, really simple with granular controls and permission. So this brings us to the topic of integrating with student information systems. With the initial release of Apple School Manager, when they previewed it a couple years ago, student information system integration was not fully available. And over the past couple of years, Apple's added a number of direct integrations. And so, of course, we have Infinite Campus PowerSchool, SunGuard eSchool Plus, who's now part of PowerSchool. But these offer direct integrations, meaning that there's a programmatic regular sync that keeps the information inside of Apple School Manager always up to date with your student information system. The huge payoff here is that Jamf Pro gets to integrate with one source, with Apple School Manager, and consume a consistent set of data to be able to scale workflows around class and user management. And I just have to say, Jamf in the past, we've looked at ways that we can solve for the student information system integration challenge. There's a lot of complexity, and it's not that it's all completely solved. The data can still be a little bit challenging, but Apple School Manager brings such a nice, consistent format that we can interact with and digest, and that multiple vendors can digest. It makes scaling this kind of solution much more feasible. So this integration is a really big win for schools. And I just want to point out that for those that don't have one of these student information system providers, other vendors provide export templates so you can automate your upload workflows, or there are options for being able to manually create CSV files, upload that information to create your information within Apple School Manager for users and for classes. For questions specific to your student information system, including your specific versions, because there's a lot of variables there, contact your Apple team to learn more. So again, this student information system integration is a really big win because this data drives every subsequent activity downstream and keeps all of those systems in sync with the latest roster changes as students come and go, teachers change, classes change, really allows for a scalable, automated management experience. So which brings to the last point here around streamlining your workflows. There are two things that I just want to talk about really briefly: account creation and account management. Now, when you think about account creation and you think about all of the Apple IDs that need to be created for students and staff, it's a pretty daunting challenge. Previously, there was the Apple ID for Students program. Of course, this was limited in its region support. It required parental consent, and it didn't totally meet the needs of some schools. Well, the good news is that with Apple School Manager, you can create managed Apple IDs en masse directly from your student information system data. And this is a process that IT controls. You can specify the domain for these Apple IDs, so the formatting of the email address. You can even have an email that's already associated with an Apple ID be used within Apple School Manager, and even give a subdomain if you want to create new managed Apple IDs without duplicating existing Apple ID email addresses. Managed Apple IDs, these Apple IDs created from Apple School Manager that are managed by your IT administrators, give users access to, among other things, shared iPad. They give access to iCloud, and they give access to iTunes U. I'll also mention that for staff, for teachers, for faculty, your managed Apple ID is also what allows you to log in to Apple School Manager. If you're a part of any delegated access workflows, you can access those, such as Content Manager or Device Manager, using the same managed Apple ID. And then this gets to the next challenge, which is managing those accounts. A lot of accounts, that's a lot of responsibility. Apple School Manager gives us mass actions, so we can take that central IT off the hook and get more people involved in making these broad changes or granular changes at the appropriate level. Things like managing password policies, creating initial passwords for managed Apple IDs, resetting passwords can quickly add up and consume a lot of time. Getting the right teachers involved, faculty and staff, ed techs involved helps students faster and gets that learning back on track sooner. I also want to point out there are some characteristics unique to managed Apple IDs that are important to understand. Now, as I said previously, there was a program, Apple ID for Students, and there's really strong concern about privacy, right? These are young children, and we want to be really careful with how that information is treated. And so managed Apple IDs have some inherent security characteristics baked in, specifically focused on security and privacy for students. All things relating to commerce is disabled, so that's App Store and iTunes purchasing, Apple Pay. Also, location services are all disabled, so that there's no correlating location activity as students are using these IDs. I'll point out there are a couple asterisks at the end of the list here. FaceTime and iMessage are also disabled, so among the things here, those two can actually be enabled by role, so you could turn those on for faculty and staff, for content managers, device managers, etc. There are some other optional management workflows as well, as it relates to being able to provide two-factor authentication code if you want someone to be able to use this managed Apple ID on a personal device at home. There's a static two-factor ID that you can give them. And managed Apple IDs can also be used for user-based invitations with VPP. Jamf Pro can actually automatically accept the user-based VPP assignments to be able to do things like deploying books directly to students' managed Apple IDs without needing any sort of interaction with the iTunes Store username, password, accepting of terms. There are a couple characteristics about the access to these accounts as well that's important to understand. The first relates to account inspection. So for a variety of reasons, a staff member may need to temporarily inspect an account of a student's shared iPad account, for instance. The account inspection feature is logged, all actions are recorded, but it temporarily creates an Apple ID and password to inspect the activity of a user. This is a 15-minute window, but it allows a member of staff to get in if they needed to take a look and inspect for any sort of activities that need to be monitored. There's also the ability, as I mentioned a moment ago, to provide students with that second factor verification code if they want to use those devices on their personal account, on their personal hardware. They can do that as well. So with managed Apple IDs, account creation and management is truly in IT's control, importantly, without compromising the end user security and privacy of the students. So with all of this in mind, I just want to cover the basic workflow really quickly and how Apple School Manager integrates with Jamf Pro. So Apple School Manager is actually technically communicating by way of a device enrollment program token, an MDM server token, to link between Jamf Pro and Apple School Manager. You can check out previous JNUC session videos for greater detail. We've got some webinars and white papers as well. But just as a best practice, I'd recommend making a MDM server dedicated just for the purpose of syncing so that other management activities don't interrupt the sync, because you'll be able to schedule regular sync intervals, and that sync is required before you can actually start importing users and classes. On that note, being able to import and match, especially if you've got existing LDAP users, you can create those users and match them with criteria. And if you import classes, it'll automatically import any users that are in the class today and any users that get added to classes later. So students flowing into classes into your district will automatically be imported if you import classes, which is a benefit of doing that instead of simply importing users. And there is an option to force your sync to refresh that Apple School Manager data if you know changes are coming. In terms of performance, when you're matching a lot of users against a lot of existing users, being able to find criteria that equals, that matches, or that starts with will be more performant than criteria such as contains or ends with. And just technically how this all works under the hood, a bit obfuscated to the IT admin, but if you're in a class in Jamf Pro, an education profile is automatically created. And it does require user information, so we do need a username. If this is a cart, make sure you've got user 1, user 2, so we can generate a valid education profile. But these are automatically updated and automatically deployed dynamically. And every time Apple School Manager syncs new data, we respond to that change and push out new education profiles. Now, when we get into the classroom experience, the Classroom app from Apple turns your iPad into a powerful teaching assistant, helping teachers focus on teaching so students can focus on learning. Classroom has a number of capabilities. At the end of the day, it's a really powerful teaching assistant, and there's a bunch of capabilities, and Apple continues to add features to the Classroom app. Notably, over the last year, they've added the capability to use Classroom without needing MDM support, without needing that aforementioned education profile. But it can be kind of unclear then how you mix and match these experiences, so I want to talk about the different ways that Classroom can be used. This new capability, this no MDM support required, no education profile required, really is empowering teachers, and it's giving students and teachers, the end users, control of that interaction. Serves a variety of use cases, but the idea is a teacher creates a class, a student joins a class, and they don't require any integration or support from IT, or truly an ad hoc on-the-fly class creation. And I want to throw up just sort of a matrix here that talks about that no MDM required, that first column of the capabilities that can be used in a teacher-managed class with no education profile required. There's this middle area here of Jamf Pro powering your classes and being able to use things like the photo server, and IT can centrally manage those at scale. And that's separate from actually having Apple School Manager, which of course aids in the sort of handling of this complex, ever-changing data, but it also gives us the SIS integration, automates the class generation, and gives us access to managed Apple IDs and the shared iPad experience. Apple Classroom runs on iPads going back several years, back to 2012. IT managed classes, the thing we've had for a couple years, requires Jamf Pro 9.9 or later, works for a one-to-one or a shared iPad experience. These new teacher-created classes require Classroom 2.0 or later and no complex MDM support required, something that, as I mentioned earlier, could be used with Jamf Now. There's one other piece of technology in the classroom that's been there for a while and has gotten some love in the last year, and that relates to Apple TV. Of course, AirPlay allows us to cast content to the screen, to share that content from a teacher or a student device. Apple's added management capabilities like they haven't had before, including automated enrollment with a device enrollment program, automating the setup, distributing apps, and configuring a number of settings. And I actually just want to show you the out-of-box experience that we're talking about with Apple TV, because there's a really innovative new way that Apple's handling the enrollment. So this is an Apple TV that's connected to power and Ethernet, and you can see it detects an Ethernet connection, it detects the network, it pulls down the DEP configuration, automatically goes through enrollment, and then actually installs an enterprise app and launches that. This is an example from Carousel Player from Tightrope Media Systems, being able to create dynamic digital signage for the classroom, scaling from a small number of classrooms up to sprawling campus environments. So some really neat capabilities with bringing more than just AirPlay, bringing native app experiences and things like single app mode to the classroom. Paired with that zero-touch deployment, Jamf Pro and Carousel, you really have a powerful solution for Apple TV in the classroom. There's a long list of other things, but just to make mention that Jamf Pro's been doing a lot over the last year. Formatting options for class names and class descriptions. Apple added support for lost mode sound, so did Jamf. Being able to retain that mode even if a device gets wiped. A number of new capabilities. That's a lot about the tech, but I said that I really want to make sure we focus as well on the experiences that are created. So let's bring Sam into the conversation and talk a little bit more about putting it all together.
All right. Thank you, Michael. As Michael mentioned, my name is Sam, and I'm an evangelist at Jamf. And like I mentioned before, our job is to get schools, students, teachers excited about the possibilities of technology. So I think today, so far, we've heard a lot about device management and technology and MDM. I think it's important to realize that in education, our customers are end users and their teachers. So it's about more than just the technology. It's about what types of experiences can we build for that classroom? How can we help students experience new things so that they can grow beyond what they came into our classrooms with and really become world citizens and technology leaders? So where you might be at today is you buy iPads and you have Jamf, but there's a lot more that Apple offers. And when we talk about going all in with Apple in the classroom, it's important to realize your iPad purchases subsidize a lot of other resources and tools. So my goal today is I want to make sure that you know about these so that you can bring them back to your districts and teachers, curriculum and instructional folks, so you can do even more with the technology that you already have in place. So let's start with iTunes U. When I talk to schools about going all in with Apple in the classroom, we're generally talking about using these iPads for content creation, content consumption. But one thing that I often see schools miss when we think about the whole picture is a learning management system that is capable of both teacher and student use of iPads. So one that I want to talk about really quickly is Apple's iTunes U. And iTunes U is a really great option. It comes at no cost to schools, and it provides everything an instructor needs to bring the classroom together on iPad. You can build lesson plans with apps, your own materials. You can collect and grade assignments, start class discussions, or talk with students one-on-one to answer questions and provide feedback. And a buzzword that we've heard quite often in education the last few years is we want to have systems that are capable of round-trip workflows for documents and assignments. And what that means is teachers should have the ability to distribute content, whether that's research materials or homework. Students should be able to annotate or complete those documents. They should be able to return them to the teacher. The teacher should be able to mark it up or give it a grade and then return it back to the student. Historically, that was difficult to do, but several years ago, Apple added annotation as a feature to iTunes U to really complete that document lifecycle for students. Beyond just managing that content, teachers can see if students have viewed or completed assignments and remind them when they're due. As Michael mentioned earlier, iTunes U is integrated with Apple School Manager, where we can give that delegated access permission to teachers to contribute to their organization's iTunes U site. So it already integrates with tools that you more than likely already use. Now, just to dispel a rumor that came out a few months ago, iTunes U did have an update that removed publicly available collections. Now, what Apple did is they moved those into the podcast app. And I just want to dispel any rumors here. This is not Apple pulling back on iTunes U. This is Apple focusing iTunes U to be a true classroom tool. It's not necessarily made for the public to consume collections. You can now do that in the podcast app. So I really do see this as a positive move. We're streamlining iTunes U for its original intended purpose, which is an LMS for schools. Also worth mentioning, iTunes U is not limited to K through 12. It is available for higher education as well. All right. So iWork and Apple Pencil. Apple's iWork has gotten some major updates over the last few years that make it an absolutely perfect fit for the classroom. So just over a year and a half ago, Apple added the ability to collaborate with other students in real time across any platform iWork is supported on. So what that means students on iOS, macOS, And modern browsers on non-Apple devices can all collaborate together on content. And this is a far better experience than trying to work together in a web-based document system, some that you may have used before. Let's also keep in mind iWork supports the rich media within iPads, as well as all the other great interaction that you can have with your iPad. For example, supporting drag and drop across apps, accessibility options, using the new Files app to either save content or pull it into your iWork documents. And from a deployment scenario, Apple simplified a lot of things as well. For those of you that have used iPads and VPP in the past, there was a very cumbersome license redemption process. Whenever you purchased a new iPad, you would have to fill out a form to acquire managed distribution licenses for those applications. The good news is those applications are now free through VPP, so it's now become even easier to acquire managed license for these applications. Apple also recently introduced its Shape collection into all of its platforms. Not going to talk too much about that, but the benefit is students are able to stay inside their application. They do not need to go to Google image search if they're looking for small graphics, whether that's animals, planets, really anything that you can think of a graphic that a student would need to drop into a document for school is now included directly into the application. So it's a streamlined process. It keeps students focused on the work at hand. And it also is fully supported for alpha, so the ability to have transparent graphics that really shine in Keynote and other applications. And Apple Pencil. There's really nothing more synonymous with schools and pencils. And not only are they a great tool for teachers to grade, students to create digitally and take notes, as the field of digital arts expands, I believe we're going to see more schools teaching graphic design and digital illustration, and the Apple Pencil is a fantastic vehicle for that. At the Jamf Nation User Conference, and this is available online, you can see Maryville University, which is outfitting all of their digital art majors, not just with an iPad Pro, but with an Apple Pencil as well. And this is doing a few things. It's strengthening students' ability to do digital illustration, but it's also quite a bit of cost savings when you compare to traditional desktop graphic design software. Oh, and for those of you that were interested, those are the shapes that I was referring to. So we've talked about changes in hardware, software, and deployment tools. But personally, I think the feather in Apple's cap this last year were teacher enablement resources. So let's talk through a few of them. Apple has a new training and certification course for teachers called the Apple Teacher Program. And you can explore modules for iOS and macOS that really show how to get the most out of your Apple devices in the classroom. It's badge-based learning, it is self-paced, and the tracks are broken out into both iOS and macOS. So if teachers are only using Mac in the classroom, they're going to learn concepts and tools that apply specifically to them. If they're learning iOS, the same is true. And what Apple focuses on is the native applications that both come on the iPad, as well as the applications that they offer, such as iWork and iLife. And most recently, they added a coding track. So if you're looking at getting into Swift Playgrounds or any of the other coding curriculum, which we'll talk about in just a second, teachers can get started on the right foot, being comfortable with the content that they will be teaching in the classroom. A few resources I want to point out for the Apple Teacher Program. On the left side, and you can find this by just Googling about Apple Teacher, this is the Apple Teacher District Guide that gives districts a really good idea of how much time is it going to take to train my teachers. What sort of resources do we need to make available? And it also talks about the ability to use the Apple Teacher Program as extended learning credits, which a lot of schools do require that their teachers go through. And on the right side, you can see hashtag Apple Teacher. So Apple Teacher is not just a training program. It's a true community where innovative, passionate teachers can get together, share content, share material, and really help all of us become better digital citizens and teachers. So Apple also created their Everyone Can Code initiative and curriculum to help schools and teachers feel 100% comfortable and supported when diving into these new topics like coding. And the types of materials that they've made available are fantastic teacher guides that help you go from knowing how to use your iPad as a personal device to truly understanding the core coding concepts. They recommend apps like CodeSpark Academy and Tinker Coding for students as young as kindergarten. And just as a side note, I just want to say, please don't let anyone ever roll their eyes at teaching programming concepts to students as young as kindergarten. Just think about this. We teach students language, and we teach students how to type and write because it's how our society communicates. We don't necessarily expect all of our students to come out of schools as authors. But the reason that we need to start teaching coding and coding concepts is as technology becomes an even bigger part of our lives, it's really important to understand how things work and elevate our level of problem-solving abilities beyond just paper and pencil. If you search online for the Everyone Can Code curriculum, you will find Apple's guide that actually breaks down students from kindergarten all the way through high school, both on what content the teacher should be using, the apps the students should be learning from, as well as recommended hours for how long will it take to go through all of these concepts. So I'm just going to zoom in on this real quickly so that you can see this is not an Apple marketing play. This is really, truly bringing coding to the classroom in an accessible way that teachers will feel comfortable with and students will appreciate. It's also important to realize that Apple's put out curriculum alignment guides so you can see what lessons align with curriculum in the CSTA recommended curriculum and for what grades. So again, I'm just going to scroll through that really quickly, but this is really valuable information for curriculum directors and instructional technologists as we think about how can we tie all this together in purposeful learning. One of the very last things I'm going to talk about is a new partner of Jamf's called eSpark Learning. And what eSpark Learning does is it looks at all of your students' personalized assessment data. And as we know, in a first grade classroom, you could have students reading at the third grade level and doing math at the kindergarten level. And what eSpark Learning does is it takes your students' personalized assessment data and it creates a playlist of apps that will specifically address their concerns and areas of deficiency that students need to focus on. So they curate all that, and then they use the Jamf API to push and pull apps immediately when they're needed. So what this does is it helps save your app budget, it gives you predictable app spending, it saves device space on your iPads, and most importantly, it removes a lot of the hard work from IT and teachers. Teachers will no longer have to scour the App Store to find apps that directly align to their curriculum, and IT won't have to spend the time scoping apps out on a daily basis to make sure that we can make the most use of that app spend. Just real quickly, a tour through eSpark. Students do a pre-quiz so that we can get a baseline for where they are. They see a framing video that will tell them about the concept that they'll learn. They see an instructional video that gives a preview of the app that they might use. eSpark will push them into that app. Afterwards, students will take a quiz to make sure that they've mastered that concept. And my favorite part is at the end, eSpark will prompt them to do a creative challenge where they reteach what they learned back to the iPad. And that video goes to both teachers, principals, as well as parents to make sure that we are actually moving the needle in education with these programs. I already mentioned that Jamf and eSpark have a great integration. Apps are automatically installed, revoked, and reused wirelessly according to the student's needs, preserving IT time, device space, and app budgets. Very last thing I'm going to very quickly talk about. This does pull from my prior Apple retail days. As an Apple retail employee, one of my favorite things were field trips to the Apple Store. And if you go to apple.com/retail/field trip, you can actually schedule your class to go in and spend time at your local Apple retail store learning coding concepts, photography skills, music creation, and a whole lot more. If you have an Apple retail store within driving distance, it is a free program. Kids get shirts, they get badges. It's phenomenal, and you'll definitely make your Apple retail team's day because we love seeing students come in and exploring more of what's possible. And lastly, virtual field trips. Virtual field trips are just an example of some of the great lesson plans available on iTunes U. You can visit the pyramids of Giza. You can do activities that revolve around the rainforest. Jamf recently put out a video case study on Yuma County and how their students, most of them will never leave Yuma County, but they utilize virtual field trips to show students that there's more to the world out there than what's just outside their front door. So hopefully you've seen today, Michael covered a lot of technology. I've talked a lot about other resources that are available to you that all you have to do is decide to use them. And so we hope that what you found today inspires you to do things maybe a little bit differently and allow students to experience different things on their technology.
Thanks, Sam. So to wrap things up, we've talked a lot about solutions that Jamf offers in Jamf Now and in Jamf Pro and how these solutions can be used in the classroom, supporting access to deployment programs, and specifically all the education capabilities that Jamf Pro unlocks. We talked about Apple School Manager, which brings device management and DEP embedded into one location, add devices to DEP regardless of how they were purchased using Apple Configurator, and then apps and books, migrating the volume purchase program and consolidating it into the Apple School Manager experience as well. And of course, Classroom app being used for a variety of scenarios, from a simple deployment in Jamf Now to a scaled integrated deployment with Jamf Pro, Apple School Manager, and Shared iPad. There are multiple permutations to that solution. Really, that puts a bow on it, which brings us to the area for questions. If you have questions, I'd encourage you to throw them in the chat room. We do have a handful that have come in, so I'll just start down that list now. Please feel free to share if you have questions. The first one relates to any limitations around licenses from 2012 through 2017. I believe this is referring to as we move from the volume purchase program licenses for apps and books to apps and books within Apple School Manager. Are there any limitations? Apple School Manager Apps and Books supports managed distribution. No longer are redemption codes supported within apps and books. That's a feature that you'd need to continue using the volume purchase program portal for if you want to do the permanent assignment of a redemption code for an app, for instance. In terms of those managed distributions, if you have codes that have not been applied, there is a page on apple.com where you can actually request that your codes be converted to managed distribution. All of those managed distribution licenses can be moved over. And to be clear, it's important that you move each token to its own location so that you don't strand any assigned content. If you want to combine everything, put each VPP token in its own location first, and then use the feature within apps and books to move available licenses between locations to consolidate or offload app licenses. In terms of, another question came in terms of the ability to deploy books without students needing to have an Apple ID. It still is the case that an Apple ID is required for books to be assigned. That is only a user-based assignment where apps can be deployed to the devices instead of the users. Books still require that user assignment. Managed Apple IDs solve for that account creation and ongoing management problem, so all students can now easily get a managed Apple ID. And the feature within Jamf Pro, the auto accept VPP invitation feature when sending invitations for user-based volume purchase program means that the users are not actually prompted. Jamf Pro talks directly with Apple School Manager and automatically accepts on that student's behalf, so you can silently assign books to a student and their associated managed Apple ID without the student actually needing to interact with an invitation approval. There's another school about how to integrate my specific SIS vendor, PowerSchool or otherwise. There's a number of different permutations and versions of each of the, for instance, Infinite Campus and PowerSchool and different levels of support. I'd encourage you to contact your Apple education team directly. You can, of course, sign up at school.apple.com, and there's some resources to work you through that integration, but contact your Apple team with any specific question. Another question relating to the limitations of being able to manage airplane mode is the specific question, but the challenge of a student turns off Wi-Fi or turns off Bluetooth. Apple doesn't let me manage those things, and then they kind of go offline. If I'm trying to do something like a critical assessment, I can't yet manage those things. Apple does have a restriction to prevent the modification of Bluetooth. So if you set that restriction on initial enrollment, Bluetooth stays on and the student cannot turn it off. Of course, there is still that airplane mode toggle, and if they turn off some of those capabilities. There's ultimately not a way to completely manage the tech to maintain a classroom connection, but the teacher will immediately know when that student goes offline. And that's where, the human interaction would be required in lieu of being able to lock them in. Of course, there are a number of assessment apps that have access to specific testing entitlements and other capabilities that allow you to ensure that an app stays locked as the student's completing an assessment. The last question is a super recent piece of news around new betas coming out from Apple, and Apple's announced sort of the future changes coming to macOS server. Brand new information as of the time of this webinar recording. Literally, it's still hours old news at the time. There's a lot of workflows that might be impacted as Apple moves to focus macOS server on core functionalities. So I won't try and venture the recommended alternatives. I know that there are a lot of different solutions out there. But as Apple evolves and focuses macOS server, some of those solutions might require different types of technologies to support them. I'll just end by saying that a version of this webinar will be recorded and available in the next I won't commit to how long, but we'll turn it around quickly and get it out to you. But I just want to say, on behalf of myself and Sam, thank you for joining the webinar. We really appreciate you joining, your attention, your questions. Thanks, and have a wonderful day.